3 Sheets to the Wind, Hocus Pocus Fanfiction. Salem was hosting its first out-and-out zombie pub crawl that year, and Catherine wasn't surprised at the enthusiasm. For a town whose economy survived on retellings of the witch hunts and Halloween enthusiasts, a zombie crawl seemed like the next logical step. So with relish, she put aside her own magical prowess and slathered on the gray paint and fake blood for a night on the town with her friends. The only real non-zombie event taking place that night was the Town Hall Halloween dance, and that's because it was the same story every year. Adults only, costumes required, $5 admission. Catherine had entertained the thought of attending only once, after high school, before her boyfriend had mysteriously dumped her and left town. Now though, she found herself more psyched up for an evening of, mostly, intentional stumbling, giggling, and knocking back some shots with Carolyn and Beth. Makeup on, her hair adequately messed up, and about a third of the way into her 18th century inspired dress, the phone rang. She carefully pressed the speaker function and chirped her hello to Beth. "Hey, Kat," came a groggy voice over the line. "I'm really sorry, but I think I came down with something. I can't stop throwing up. There's no way I'm drinking tonight." Catherine frowned. Beth had sounded fine earlier in the week. "I'm sorry, hon. Carrie and I'll have a few shots for you, okay? Feel better." She hung up and went back to pulling her bodice shut. The tingling in the back of her head was her only warning before the phone rang again. This time, she went on the offensive. "Let me guess. Came down with something and can't go?" There was a moment of tense silence on the other end before. "Beth already called, huh?" "Mm-hmm." "Oh," Carrie sighed. "Well, I'm not sick, but yeah, I'm canceling. Sorry, Mom stuck me with candy duty even though I'm only back for the weekend." Catherine gave up on the dress for the moment. "And there's no way you can get out of it?" "Well, she already left for town hall, Kat." Damn. With a deep breath and a burst of energy, the confounded dress laced itself up her body. Maybe next year then. She could practically see Carrie nodding on the other end. "Absolutely, we'll definitely do something next year. I really miss you guys." "Miss you too, Carolyn. Have fun with the brats then." Costume finally in place, she turned to face the mirror and grinned. The dress fit perfectly, with a little mystical help. It was a long colonial gown with bell sleeves and a deep blue color, accented with paisley bows, one of which was haphazardly sitting in her messy updo. It was perfect. It also didn't escape her notice that the color of the gown was almost exactly the shade of a certain zombie dude's eyes. The streets were cluttered with the walking dead. Some of them still behaving like breathing specimens, but most were already so hammered they were falling all over themselves. It made her giggle, recalling with fondness her friend's own lack of equilibrium. He'd fit right in with this crowd, which is precisely why she was on her way to the cemetery. Last year, she'd taken him around town, and nearly every 5 minutes they were stopped so people could remark on how amazing his costume was. His responses were endearing in the most ridiculous way. He'd scratch the back of his neck, mumble out a rough-sounding "thanks," or nod his head, eyes averted. If it were a group of cute girls, anyway. This year, he'd blend right in with the rest of the undead horde, herself included. She did have a few misgivings about her costume choice. Some small part of her was afraid she'd offend him, but he seemed to have a good enough sense of humor. Maybe he'd even appreciate an attempt to help him blend in. Her fingers twisted the fabric of her skirt as she anxiously made her way down the winding paths of the cemetery. Even worse was that she'd actually memorized a couple of incantations for raising the dead, just in case. She'd gone back to Omen after last year, and while buying a few sachets of incense, had tossed over her shoulder a "Billy says hi." The look on Allison's face had made her own heart skip a beat. Was she really messing with something bad? Nothing for it, though. She'd already arrived. And to Catherine's absolute horror, Billy Butcherson was perched on the edge of his own tombstone, fiddling with the tattered lace on his sleeve. He looked up and stopped cold when he saw her. "Hi?" she managed to squeak out. "Les?" Gathering her wits from where they dropped near her buckled shoes, she did a twirl. "What do you think? I look positively decrepit, don't I?" What's the occasion? You mean you didn't know? She blinked innocently at him. It's Salem's first ever zombie pub crawl. Billy shuffled away from the stone slab and took in her ensemble. The dress she wore reminded him of the old days, and he wasn't sure how to feel about that. As for the rest, the young witch looked, well, like him. Quite dead. A what now? Short story. Everyone dresses up like a zombie, meanders from bar to bar, and gets completely plastered, she explained. Might be the start of an annual tradition. Catherine wasn't entirely sure how he managed to condescendingly arch an eyebrow at her, but he did it. You mean to drag me round all the taverns to watch a mob of painted gits drink themselves stupid? That's the general idea, but no, I had a better plan. They stood outside Town Hall, watching revelers come and go. The thrumming beat of the music could be felt all the way out to the sidewalk. Something dark and sensual that slithered along Catherine's spine. It beckoned her closer, nearer to the searing heat of warm bodies pressing against each other. It was an energy she had a hard time ignoring as she dug around her little coin purse for the required $10. Truth be told, the young witch was surprised that her zombie companion had agreed so readily to this outing. He'd sounded so uninterested in mingling with the painted gits that his ready acquiescence to attending the dance startled her. Still, she wasn't about to question it. Relinquishing 2 folded-up bills from her stash, she handed them over to the attendant and pulled William inside with her. The lights blinded them both momentarily, before revealing a mass of dancing monsters. They swayed and dipped in time to the beat, almost in slow motion. Catherine shook herself out of a daze when Billy spoke. This is what you wanted, eh? What do you mean? His eyes were glued to the floor. I imagine you wanted to dance, no? Catherine grinned, taking him by the hand and leading him further into the crowd. Absolutely. There were a few moments of uncertainty about where to place his hands, but once she was in his arms, Billy forgot all about how unclumsy his undead self was, and they were sweeping across the floor. They moved through one song and into the next, his memories flitting from close embraces with Sarah, the way Winifred's skirts would swish across the wooden floors, to the way he used to look. Quite dashing if he said so himself. A tug to his hair brought him back to the present. Catherine was gazing up at him. You looked a little lost. I'm right here. Indeed. The lights dimmed for another slow and sexy song, and Catherine was unexpectedly pleased when Billy pulled her just a bit closer. He was tall, not too much taller than her, but at the perfect height for her to fit her head under his chin. When she inhaled, her senses took in the old scent of withering wood, stale dirt, and something distinctly male. He didn't smell like a dead guy, not really. This is my first time coming here, she said, feeling the need to say something. Right after high school, actually. The boyfriend and I had a Halloween date, but he bailed on me and left town. So I'm glad you agreed to do this. She didn't expect him to say anything, but the gentle squeeze to her shoulder spoke volumes. And for the remainder of the night, they stayed that way, moving across the floor until the music stopped. It was a slow walk back to the old burial hill, and Catherine had kicked her shoes off hours ago. 2 blisters had formed on the back of her heels, and she'd rather a barefoot stumble home than bleed in her fancy heels. They were held daintily in one hand, her other slipped around William's arm. He'd been uncharacteristically withdrawn for a majority of the night, and Kat was too afraid to ask him what was up. She had a bad feeling. The grave was exactly as he'd left it, wooden lid wrenched open and awaiting his return. Billy slipped free of her and moved towards it. This is the last time, isn't it? Her shaky voice stopped him. Brows furrowed, he turned back to look at her. Her shoes had dropped to the ground, and her arms were wrapped around her quivering frame. This isn't going to happen anymore, is it? It might be better, he softly agreed. The first time was an accident. Her voice came out ragged, holding back tears. And last year, I hoped, but I wasn't expecting anything. And tonight you were just there, and And he surprised them both with this swift movement as he pulled her into his arms and held tight. What do you want me around for anyways? Catherine took that moment to memorize the embrace. Sounds stupid, I know. We've met, 3 times, and you're still the only real friend I have. You know, I'm dead. And according to a majority of the modern world, I don't exist, she countered. Pulling away, she gave him a stern look. So I'll be back next Halloween, and by the gods, if you don't shake the dirt from your bones, It was an impulsive move on his part, one he'd been contemplating all night, but too afraid to enact. He kissed her.